Okay, good evening, everyone. Today we're going to be tackling a very interesting question. Why burial? Why does Judaism place such a great emphasis that a person should have a proper Jewish burial? We all know, sadly, during the war now in Israel, that our soldiers went on self-sacrifice, literally, in order to rescue bodies that were in tunnels. Over the years, they went to try to find different, sadly, body parts that have flown into many different places. In 2004, one of the worst, dangerous places where a bunch of people were killed. There's pictures of the Israeli army climbing on the knees, bending down, making layer upon layer, sifting through the sand to try to find different parts of people that were sadly killed and blown up. And two of the soldiers were actually killed trying to recover all the parts of, sadly, people that were killed. And the question obviously is, why? What's the significance of making sure that a body which does not have any life anymore should get the proper burial? And I'll share a very interesting story. There was a Jewish family in Europe that the wife was taken away, and the husband and son went to a neighbor, a non-Jewish neighbor, to stay during the war. And the neighbor was very nice to them and very friendly. And as time went on, this man started to have a relationship with this woman that was letting him and his son live in the house. And eventually they had a child. And after the war, he moved with this non-Jewish woman, non-Jewish child, to America. And he became wealthy, but his son wanted to live more of an observant life, and he immigrated to Israel. One day, he's notified that his father died. And he comes to America to go to the funeral of his father. And the child, it's not a child, it's an adult by now, that was born from this non-Jewish woman, says that he's going to be buried together with my mother in a non-Jewish cemetery. And he says, no. A Jewish person has to have a Jewish burial. Whatever he did, but he's still a Jew. Comes from an observant family. I still remember the life before the war. Now this man was very, very wealthy, and he had $50 million. He left $25 million to one child and $25 million to the other child. So the Jewish boy tells his non-Jewish brother, so to speak, I'll give you $50,000 if you make sure that my father, our father, has a proper Jewish burial in a Jewish cemetery. And they started arguing. And they went to the court. And the judge says, we'll make cremation, and we'll place half of the body, of the ashes, in the Jewish cemetery, and half in the other. He tried to be King Solomon. And obviously, the Jewish guy says, no, it can't work. I can't. I need to have him buried. The whole entire body should be buried in a proper Jewish cemetery. So the son of the non-Jewish woman says, I'll agree that you could bury the father in a proper Jewish burial on the condition that you give me the entire $25 million. The father left over $50 million, 25 for me, 25 for you. If you give me the entire $25 million, that's $50,000 you offered. If you give the entire $25 million, you have a proper Jewish burial. He called a leading rabbi in Israel. What is he supposed to do? Is he supposed to make sure that his father has a Jewish burial, although it's going to cost him $25 million, money which obviously he didn't have? He's going to have it now, but he's going to have to give it up. Or does he say, okay, forget it, have a good day? So the original rabbi that he contacted actually said that he has to give up the $25 million that his father should have a Jewish burial. Other rabbis disagreed, and other rabbis said the father himself grew up religious, knew what it's all about, and decided to leave the path. The son doesn't have to go the obligation to so far. And again, I'm not going to go into what he decided, but the fact that there's a debate and that there's an opinion that says the son had to give up $25 million in order that his father should have a proper Jewish burial. We see that Judaism places a tremendous significance on Jewish burial. And obviously the question is, what's so important that the body is buried in a proper way that we have to go to such extremes? And obviously many people say, who cares? As one guy once told me, after I'm dead, who cares what happens to my body? The body is lifeless, there's nothing left in it, who cares what happens? So this week's Torah portion, the portion of Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, although the entire portion talks about after the life of Sarah, but that's a separate discussion why it's called life of Sarah, because her life continued on through her son Yitzchak and eventually grandkids. But the entire portion talks about Sarah's afterlife, beginning with our father Avram paying a very, very hefty price, like we'll see inside the sources, to buy not just a plot, but an area where there could be a proper Jewish burial for his wife and for those that are going to follow afterwards. Let us take a look inside. But before we actually go into the verses that are going to describe the negotiation that Avram had with a man named Ephron, he was the mayor of Hebron, the one in charge, to buy the entire area, there's another question that comes up first. Take a look at the source, number one. When we finish the story of Abraham taking Isaac for a sacrifice, last week's class, the Torah over there says, and Avram returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Be'er Sheva. That's what the Torah says. Where did he go? Avram to Be'er Sheva. After the story of Avram taking Yitzchak to the sacrifice, and obviously at the end it didn't happen because God told him not to. Where did he return to? That's the point that we're getting to. It says he returned to Be'er Sheva. And Avram dwelled in Be'er Sheva. Then what does it say? It says, this week's portion, that, and Sarah died in Kiryas Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Avram came from Be'er Sheva to mourn for Sarah. So the obvious question is, what was Sarah doing in Hebron? If Avram was living in Be'er Sheva, that was the place where he lived, how did Sarah all of a sudden die in Hebron? She should have passed away in Be'er Sheva, and then they traveled together to bury her in the city of Hebron. But the Torah tells us that she actually passed away in the city of Hebron. 1 second. Didn't Avram live together with his wife in Be'er Sheva? So if you take a look at the commentaries have different answers to this. I'm going to give a few answers to get to one point. If you take a look at the commentary of Rashi, Rashi tells us the phrase Avram dwelt in Be'er Sheva does not refer to a permanent settlement, as he was living in Hebron. He had left Be'er Sheva 12 years before the binding of Yitzchak and moved to Hebron. And his stay in Be'er Sheva was only temporarily. Rashi says as following, that Avram had a house in Hebron, but before that, he had a temporary dwelling place in the city of Be'er Sheva. But it's not exactly smooth. Why is that? Because at the end of last week's portion, it says that they went back to Be'er Sheva. So you can't say only lived temporarily and never went back. So if you go into the next source, the Ramban, Nachmanides says something very interesting. He writes, the command for binding Yitzchak was given in Be'er Sheva, where Avram lived, and to which he returned. This is supported by the earlier text that says, and Avram planted tree in Beersheba, and Avram journeyed to the land of the Plishtim for many days, referring to Beersheba, which was in the Plishtim territory. Hence, the 3-day journey to the binding was because Plishtim land was distant from Yerushalayim, from Jerusalem, which Hebron in the Jordan Hills is much closer. So he actually says that Avram was actually in Beersheba, which makes the question stronger. If they were living in Beersheba, how in the world did Sarah pass away? How did she die in Hebron? It's a totally different city. So there are different commentaries. We'll go through a few. One is as following. One says that the Rebbe writes, when Avram saw that he and Sarah were old and advanced in years, he feared they might die soon and realized that they didn't have a burial, they didn't have a place yet in the land of Canaan. He did not want to be buried outside of it, since he had a tradition stating that Adam and Chava were buried in the cave, so he sent Sarah to purchase it from Ephron. Now, why did he do that? Why didn't he come himself? Why did he send his wife to purchase it? Because if he was going to come himself, he was scared they're going to say, oh, Avram's coming, there must be something unique about this place, and the price is going to go all the way up. A lot of times people do it today in real estate as well. They want to buy a house. If it's an honorable person or a respectable person, a celebrity is going to come in, the price goes up. You send some who knows who to come in, and they come in, they say, maybe I'll buy it, maybe not, and you can get it. Therefore he sent Sarah. It shouldn't be Avram, it shouldn't be so clear. Now, while she was making a negotiation over the price to try to start getting ready to go, she passed away. Why did Avram want that particular place? So the story goes back actually 30 years before that. 30 years before that, we know Avram had guests that came to his house. Guests, it was angels that came to visit him. And then the Torah tells us, it says he went to get 3 calves. He ran. So the Holy Zohar says, on the verse that says, Ve'el habakar ratz Avram, it says he ran to get it. The animal ran into the cave of Machpelah. The cave of Machpelah is in Hebron. Today when you come to Hebron, there's a big structure, it's a big building. You actually have to go up, for those over there, you go up many, many steps. And over there they have a place where everyone prays. This entire structure is built on top of a cave. Deep down, there's a cave that had 4 compartments. One was for Adam and Eve. And when he came down to that cave, chasing that animal, he saw what was going on there. It says he saw that Adam and Eve, they were learning, was the opening to Gan Eden, the opening to paradise. Eventually, Avram and Sarah are going to be there. Yitzchak and Rivkah, and Yaakov and Leah. So Avram, 38 years earlier, knew that this is the place to be. This is where Adam and Eve is. This is a very, 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 very good spot. And he wanted to buy the whole area. The cave and everything around, like we'll see in a second. In order to get to that, he had to approach him. But he kept it inside him. He was scared all the years to bring it up because they're not going to want to sell it to him, or they're going to ask him for a price that's ridiculous. So he tried to keep it low key. But when they're getting older, time came, this is where he had to go. Now, by the way, not all the commentaries learn like this. Some commentaries actually say on this question that they had 2 homes. They lived in Hebron, and Beersheba was a more busy place. So Avram was in the business of bringing people to know godliness. So he hung out in a place where there's big traffic. You have a lot of times people live in one place and they work in another place. So, but again, that's another way of learning it. But the way many commentators learn it, she was there in order to get the place where she's going to be buried. And by the way, the other answer to this question as well. Some say Avram wasn't sure how to give over his wife the whole story that he almost killed his own son. So to think it over as he was going home, he first stopped in the city of Hebron, in Beersheba, to take time to figure out the right wording that he needed in order to get back home. But the point they're making from this class is that what you need to know for now is that according to many commentaries, Sarah was there in order to buy this piece of land. And again, what was so unique that Avram had to do everything possible to make sure that he has such a good, great burial place. Now, in order to understand this, we also first have to look the wording that's used by Avram and the wording that's used by Ephron, the one that owned the land at the time. What Ephron offered, forget the money. The money will come in a second. And what Avram wanted. So if you take a look at source number 2, take a look at the source, it says as follows. Again, it's very, very important to look at these words to recognize the difference between the two. It says, and he spoke to the children of Ches, saying, grant me possession of a burial site among you. Achuzas kever, a burial site. And the children of Chet answered Avram, in the choicest of your graves, bury your dead. And Avram bowed before the people of the land, the children of Ches, and he said, listen to me, and introduced me to Ephron, the son of Tzayar. He was the one in charge. And then he said, for the full price, he's going to willing to price whatever it is, doesn't want it for free. Then he says, let him give it to me as a possession of a burial site. And Ephron the Chit answered, the field I give you, and the cave that is in it, I give it to you. So if you look at one of the commentaries, it says very clearly. It says, bury me with my fathers. The field that Avram purchased from Ephron the Chiti was the possession of a burial site. And they buried him in the cave of Machpelah field, the field as a possession of a burial site. Avram was asking not for a specific plot, but he wants to have a huge site. And the question is, come on, person passes away, buy a place, 2 places. No, that's not what he wants. He wants to have an entire site. He wanted to have the cave, the field, everything around it. Why? So it's brought down what Avram was telling Mr. Ephron was, we have a whole different view here on things. You're telling me a person dies, you don't want it to smell, there's a body, we have to do something to the body, we have a pit, put them in the burial site where everyone does, and then eventually it's taken out and we move on. And Avram says, no, I don't want to have a regular pit, I don't want a cave where everything is just put in and that's it, one's place. I need a burial site, I need a place where it's going to be for eternity. Those were the words that he was using. If you ever take a look when you restudy the Parsha, you restudy the Torah portion, you'll see. They're constantly saying that we're here to give you a plot. And what's he asking for? He's asking for a site. And if you take a look later on, when Jacob, when he's in Egypt, and he says, I don't want to be buried in Egypt, he also says he wants to be buried in the site. Use that same word. In the site where my parents are. Not just you put me somewhere, after a person passes away, there's a body, you don't want it to smell, it comes to a place until completely there's nothing left, and then you move on. No, they wanted to have a certain site. Let's look into the Malbim, one of the commentaries. Look what he says. He says it's very simple. He says, the children of Ches believed that the dead would not live again, and the burial was merely a temporary to avoid the disgrace and odor of the body. Thus, they would later remove the remains from the graves. Avram, however, requested a permanent burial site, a possession of a burial site. Those are the words that he used. The Chitim who did not share this belief said, why do you need this permanent possession? Use any of our choicest graves. Put wherever you want for now, and then that's it. In a few years, it's all gone anyways. And this is where they both had a disagreement. So again, we have to understand, why was Avram so adamant that there's a place where the body stays forever, and not just that it's there for a temporary place, and then you move on? Why? So we're going to be going into a little bit of a deep concept to explain the significance of the body of a Jew. But before we get to that, we'll start off with a story in the Talmud. It's source number 3 for those looking inside. The story tells us there was a queen in Egypt who asked Reb Meir, one of the great rabbis at the time of the Mishnah. He said, I know that the dead will live again, as it is written. They shall blossom out of the city like the grass on the earth. But they will they arise naked or clothed? That was the question that he asked. It reminds me of a story. There was once a tailor. He didn't have business. Things were very bad. One day he's all excited. They asked him why you're all excited. He said, I read that when Mashiach comes, it's going to be the resurrection of the dead. And when it's going to be the resurrection of the dead, everyone's going to come up. They're going to need clothes. And I'm going to be very busy. I'm going to be busy nonstop making clothes for everyone. You can imagine millions of people coming back. So one guy said, it's wishful thinking because in every generation there were tailors. So Yankel passed away. The guy buried a few places down. The Shmuel, the tailor, where he made all the suits all the years, he's going to go straight to Shmuel. So he answers back, no, they have nothing to worry about. They don't know the latest style. I'm the only one that knows the latest style. And therefore, they're going to come to me. So this is the question he asked Rameir. Are the dead going to rise with clothes? Or are they going to rise naked? It's a good question. You wanted to know? It's an interesting question. By the way, people asked me this question in the past. Whenever it came up, we're talking about the resurrection of the dead, Mashiach, these things, question came up, and I gave the source of this story. Let's see what she answered. He answered her. So she was the queen. So he said as following. Rameir responded, it is a logical thing that we can learn from wheat. If wheat buried naked sprouts with many coverings, how much more so the righteous who are buried clothed that they're going to have. Just like when you put a wheat into the earth, there's almost nothing there. And eventually what happens when it actually grows, what happens to it? The kernel comes out. There are many, many layers covering it. So if a kernel that comes in completely naked, nothing there, grows with so much, how much more so the righteous that were buried in clothes or buried with something, when they're going to come out back, they're going to be coming in proper clothes. Now let's explain this for a minute. What was he alluding to? What was he getting at? What the Talmud was telling us, what he was answering was, that when a person is buried, we're going to learn from a kernel what happens. What happens to the kernel? The kernel dissolves, but it's not really dissolving. While it's in the earth, it gives room to tremendous growth. It grows further and further and further and further. And therefore, when a person is buried, it's not that the body just goes away and there's nothing left. You're now planting a seed for the future resurrection, which is going to go further. Now, in order to understand this a little bit more, let's go into the next source, and then we're going to go through it a little more detail to explain the significance of the body of a person, especially of a Jew. One of the commentaries on this Talmud says that when a plant or animal is buried, eventually what happens is it can be used for fertilizer, as the fundamental elements of the plant or animal remain unchanged. They merely separate and return to their original sources. Thus, when wheat is placed in the soil, not only do all the elements come back to life, but also sprouts and produces much more than it originally was. And when something is going down, so to speak, it's really enabling and increasing growth. However, the burying of a body, God forbid when it happens, when it's reduced to ashes, destroying the foundation elements of oxygen, water, and carbon, everything else, nothing remains on earth. What happens then, the components, they go away completely in the air, leaving only the ashen remains of the body's material. When a person is buried, there's something left that gives room for the growth to go, continue to grow. The Talmud tells us that there's a bone which is called a loose bone. And although the entire body maybe goes away after years, sometimes yes, sometimes not, depending on the person. Sometimes you still dig up a grave and you still find people. But let's say even if everything goes away, there's one bone that never goes away. And through that bone, the body is going to be resurrected when Mashiach is going to come. And here comes something very interesting. What is so unique about the body that it has in it such great potential that even when it goes into the earth, there's something that remains, and later on that gives it the space to eventually grow, when Mashiach is going to come to have the resurrection. So in order to understand this, we first have to go to explain the significance of the holiness of the body of a Jew. The Torah tells us as follows. If a person had a death penalty, that they had to be hung. God forbid. It's very hard to get a death penalty. But if, for whatever the reason is, a person had a death penalty, they had to be hung, the Torah tells us we're not allowed to leave the body overnight. The guy could have been a murderer, could have been the worst things. He's hung, and with a few minutes later, he's taken down. Why? So the Torah tells us because when he's hung, it's a curse to God, because man was created in the image of God. And the foremost commentary, Rashi, tells us as following. He gives an analogy to understand it. There were two identical brothers. One was a king, and one was a hooligan, a thief, a murderer. And eventually, the brother did so many bad things that he was put to death. And if he's hanging outside in the center of the city, anyone that walks by says, "Oh, the king is hanging." They look identical. People don't know the difference. And therefore, you're not supposed to leave him hanging because it's going to be a disgrace for the king. The same is true, the body of a person, especially a Yid, is identical to God. Our body was something that God made. And the body is extremely, extremely holy. And if the body, God forbid, has to get killed because a person deserves a death penalty, again, it was very, very difficult to get there. That body was not able, you were not allowed to leave it. You right away had to go and give it a proper burial, although it was killed, although the person was killed. Because the body itself always remains extremely, extremely holy, as it's a part of God. So the body of a Jew is something that has in it tremendous, tremendous, tremendous holiness. Today, we're living in a time where we know that in every physical thing, there's tremendous energy. In the metal spoon, there's so much energy. The atom bomb. It's something small, which you don't even realize. Sometimes you don't even see it. But these materialistic, physical things have within it a tremendous amount of energy, which is not seen to the naked eye. The reason why we don't see it, our rabbis tell us, the teaching of Chassidut, the higher something is, when it falls to the lowest possible. You have a building, let's say 10 floors. The bricks that are on top of the 10th floor, if the building falls, those bricks fall further away. The ones that are on bottom are going to fall right where it is. So when something is very holy and it has to come down to this world, the only place it can come down to is something that's extremely distant from it. And therefore, the sparks of godliness, the greatest level possible, is found in the body of the Jew. When Mashiach is going to come, we're going to have the resurrection of the soul within the body. At the end of the day, the body of a Jew is what does the mitzvot. In order for a mitzvah to be done, you need a hand to put on tefillin. You need feet to walk to shul. You need a mouth in order to pray. Our physical body has within it so much godliness. The physical things of this world become holy. A person takes a piece of parchment from an animal and writes on it the words of a mezuzah and places it on the front door. This is something that becomes extremely holy. This is something that's a very, very holy thing. So the materialistic things look like there's no godliness in it, but we understand from science how within the materialistic things, there's this immense amount of spirituality that's found within it. And the same is true, obviously, with the body that's found within every single Jew. And therefore, the Torah tells us how much we have to make sure that we treat the body with respect, because the body itself is it's something holy. And even though maybe you don't see it, but it's holy and it continues to stay holy, and it's something that's holy, stays forever. And by the way, it's a very very similar concept. If a person had a mezuzah, it's not kosher, right? We check mezuzahs for people all the time. The mezuzah, either water got into it, wasn't written right, tefillin are old, you have your great-grandfather's tefillin. You can't throw it in the garbage. Either you bury it, because the physical thing became holy, or you can hold on to it in a respectful place. But if not, it has to be buried, because it's a holy thing. Just to illustrate this a bit, the great tzaddik, Rabbi Levi of Barditchev. Barditchev is a town, it's not a town, it's a city in Ukraine. I had the merit to visit a number of times, to pray by the grave of Rabbi Eliezer of Barditchev. He once went on Yom Kippur. It's not the famous story. There's a famous story I always share. Rabbi Eliezer of Barditchev always tried to find good things to say about the Jewish people. The famous story that I always share is, he once went on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, a day that everyone knows he's supposed to fast, and he sees a Jew eating a sandwich. He wants to say something good about the Jew. So he goes over to the Jew. He tells me, he probably forgot today's Yom Kippur. He says, Rabbi, I know it's Yom Kippur. And he gives a bite into the sandwich. So right away, he tries to find something else. He says, you probably don't know that the Torah says Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to eat. He says, Rabbi, I know it's Yom Kippur. I know the Torah tells you not allowed to eat. And he gives another bite. What are you going to say good? Rabbi Barditchev picked his hands up to God and said, God, look how precious your kids are. They could do the worst sin, but a lie they'll never say. So he was always able to find something good to say about the Jewish people. So the story is told about Rabbi Eliezer Barditchev. It was one Yom Kippur, and Rabbi Eliezer Barditchev saw there's a tremendous decree on the Jewish people, and he has to find something very powerful to say about something that a Jewish person did to tip the scale to get rid of this decree. And he didn't know what to do. So he started to walk through the different homes on the outskirts of the city, Barditchev. And he came into a certain home, he heard crying, and he went inside, and he sees a girl. She was an older girl, in her 20s, I'm not sure the exact age. And she's crying. And as soon as she saw the tzaddik, he says, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. I'm asking God every day forgiveness for what I've done. I'm embarrassed. I hope God forgives me. So Rabbi Barditchev asks her, what did you do? So she says, I lived in a different city, a little town, and our family had a dairy farm. And I would go very often to the nobleman, the one that owned all the lands, to deliver the farm, to deliver the dairy, to collect the payments. And the nobleman tried to get me to sin with him. And obviously I refused. How could I do it? And one time he told me, let me just put my hand through your hair. I want to feel your soft hair. And she says, I didn't want that to happen, but he just put his hands in and he touched one part of my hair. And after that, I realized that I have to get out of here because if not, I'm in danger. And I ran away from the place that I lived, and I came down here to the city of Barditchev, so the nobleman doesn't know where I am. And I'm crying because there's one piece of hair that he actually touched, and he had a mind to sin. And since that time, I shaved my head, and I left one piece of hair, one little few pieces of hair together, and I always say that this was something that almost caused me to sin, and how bad I am, and how terrible things are. Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchev, after hearing the story, he wiped away his tears. He was emotional hearing such a story. And he says as following. He told God, Master of the world, if you need any merits for the Jewish people, let this little piece of hair that she has be the one that's going to be on the scale to tip for the Jewish people, to give them only good decrees. And obviously he told her, obviously you were forgiven, you did nothing wrong, and you can move on in life, obviously everything is good. So we understand that the physical things of our body is not only ours, it's godly. And when it's used in the right way, it brings out godliness in this world. The body has invested in it so many different things that are found with tremendous energy of godliness that are found within it. In order to understand this, we'll explain something interesting. When a person has a deep thought they want to share it to someone else, They have to put it into simple words in order that the other person should be able to relate to those words. So we look at those little words, those letters, it looks empty. There's nothing really there. But within it is hidden a tremendous, tremendous depth of knowledge. Another example is given. You have a child that's born. Where does the child come from? It comes from a drop of the Father. You look at that drop, you say there's nothing in it. But in essence, over there you have everything of the child that's going to be born. The brain, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. When you look at it, you don't see it. But in it is found so many things. How much more so is the body of the Jewish person? That a person spent 70, 80, 90 years doing good things, and we all do good things in this world. How much more so does this body contain with it a tremendous, tremendous amount of holiness? Even if a person didn't do any good, the body itself has invested in it so much parts of God. It's a part of God. Like we explained before, why it's forbidden to leave a person overnight, because it has in it so much godliness. You know, sometimes we just see a hand, a foot, but we can't really tell how much energy is within it. The Lubavitch Rebbe, when he was in Berlin, there was a great rabbi, the Eliezer Rebbe came, he wasn't able to see properly, and he came to visit him. The Rebbe was dressed as a regular person. When he was in Berlin, he had a fancy suit. He didn't look like anything like a Hasidic rabbi. And there were hundreds of people that came to tell this great Rebbe, the Eliezer Rebbe, to tell him Shalom Aleichem, to wish him, just to shake his hand. And when the Rebbe came, he said, "Das is a warme Hand. It's a warm hand." And he asked the people next to him, "Who is this man?" They knew who he was. And they told him it's the son-in-law of the previous Lubavitch Rebbe. Now, it wasn't a warm hand because he had a glove in his hand beforehand and it was physically warm. He was able to detect within a person the tremendous amount of energy that was shining forth in a real way. We cannot always tap into that. But what we have to know is that our bodies are extremely holy. And when we treat the bodies in a holy way, we understand how the body is not something that ceases to exist. Although it's buried, there's a part of it that remains. And while it's within the earth, it's kept. That when the time is going to come, from there it's going to spread out with the resurrection, with the coming of Mashiach. Based on this, we can explain something significant in this week's Torah portion about the uniqueness of a materialistic things that becomes part of God. In this week's portion, we learn about the first shadchan, the first matchmaker. Right? Everyone knows matchmaker. Matchmaker, make me a match. Right? Everyone knows. What did Avram do? Avram took the guy in charge of his house, Eliezer, and he told him where to go. That doesn't sound good. Where to go, sometimes tells him. He told him that I do not want a daughter from this area where I'm living in. The people living here are cursed. I want you to find someone from within my family. And the girl has to be willing to live in Israel. She has to leave her parents' home to come here. Come to Israel. And those were the two conditions that Avram made. Before Eliezer left on his mission, Avram made him take an oath. What did he tell him to do? You look at the verse, like what's going on here. Avram tells Eliezer, place your hand under my thigh. The place of a circumcision. Like I always tell people, today you do that, you get arrested. What is going on over here? What in the world is going on over here? Why is Avram telling Eliezer to place his hand there when he makes the oath that he's only going to take a girl for his son from his family and that the girl is going to come back to live in Israel? You want to make an oath? Make an oath. But why place his hand over there? And the answer that's given is as following. At that time, Avram had one commandment from God, and that was the mitzvah of circumcision. That was the only physical thing that God told him to make a mitzvah with. By doing so, he was able to bring the holiness into there. Later on, we have the Torah, the holiest thing. Back in the day when people used to swear, they used to open up the ark and they would hold on to the Torah, and that's how people would swear. Up until a little bit before the war, that's what was done. Eventually, what happened was the rabbi saw a guy is holding on to the Torah and he said, I swear. And they know he's full of it. They stopped swearing because it's a disgrace for the Torah. Back in the day, even though a guy knew he was 100% right, he didn't want to swear. He would rather pay than have to take an oath. A similar thing in other parts of the world. When you have to make an oath, they give you a Bible, they give you something to pick up to make an oath. You're saying the truth. You were speeding, you weren't speeding. They tell you to hold something. If a person is God-fearing, he won't make an oath that's not true. If he's God-fearing, he's only going to say the truth. But then there wasn't a Bible that was holy because there was no commandment yet to write a Torah. The only commandment that he had, the only physical thing I was able to tell him to do was God told me to circumcise myself and therefore to place my hand in that area while you're making the oath to be next to a place where there's a mitzvah. Obviously, once God gave us the Torah, we actually have the actual Torah scroll that we're able to hold. But again, we understand how something physical becomes holy if we're doing what God tells us to do. So the body of the Jew is something that's holy. Now we can understand a little bit better the importance of burial. It's a part of God that's being placed in the ground. It's a part of God that's going to stay for eternity. We're not just keeping the body because, God forbid, people say it shouldn't smell. There are many ways how to prevent that. We're doing it because it's a part of God that we have to make sure that's going to stay around. And while it's in the earth, that's where it's preserved. Like we said before, when time is going to come, Mashiach is going to come, from there it's going to be reborn. And this godliness that's within it is buried as well. I'll just conclude with the other ones I gave out throughout the class. I did it verbally, but in the source sheet, the last part is a quote from something that the Rebbe wrote. And that is as following. The purpose of creation in general, and the creation of humanity in particular, is because God desired a dwelling place in the lower realms. That means that physical existence and all the materialistic things should achieve the state of bittul, which is self-nullification, through which the infinite light of God would dwell and be revealed within them. This is why the Torah mitzvahs were given to be performed in the physical world, so that the material be transformed and made into a vessel for godliness. The process of refining creation is ongoing, and its ultimate completion will occur in the era of the resurrection, when the spirit of impurity will be removed from the earth, and at that time the reward will be realized specifically in the physical world, and the soul reunited with the body. This represents the ultimate purpose of perfection of the world, for which it was created from the outset. I'll just conclude. Let's not talk so much about the afterlife. Let's talk about the life. In life, we have to realize that the materialistic things that we have are here to bring out godliness in this world. And every single person has an obligation to find what is it that they can do, what others can't, to make sure that their physical things in this world are elevated to godliness. And I'll share a story. Since we're talking about Hebron, where Sarah is buried, there's a Jew living in Hebron. He's a big artist. His name is Baruch Nachshon. And he was not born into a very religious family. And eventually got close to Chabad. And he once came to the Rebbe. And he told the Rebbe that, he loves drawing. But he doesn't think that, people are telling him it's inappropriate for Judaism. You should become a painter. Do something else. So the Rebbe told him, for generations, the art of being an artist was never really, the talent of art was not yet elevated into godliness. The Rebbe says, because you have a desire and you have a talent for it, you should go to school and become perfect, becoming an artist. And the Rebbe paid for his schooling. While he was in the States, I believe he went to Pennsylvania, he went to one of the universities, and he took upon himself to become an artist and to elevate the talent of art through making paintings. And he went to Israel, and he made many different paintings of Jerusalem, of Hebron, stories of the Torah. And he came to New York, and he actually set up a gallery right next to 770. And the Rebbe actually went to look at the gallery. Looked at the pictures, made different comments, the paintings. Interesting note. During that, the Rebbe asked him, "How come there's no prices on the paintings?" So he told the Rebbe, when people see the prices on the paintings, they faint. They have a heart attack. It's too expensive. They can't handle it. They get sick from seeing the prices. So the Rebbe told him he should sell the paintings to healthy people, or he should write on the paintings, "These paintings are for people that are healthy." But the point that the Rebbe was making was that your talent that you have to utilize it. Things that are found in this physical world are here for us to elevate. It's our job to recognize that the materialistic physical things are not separate from God. On the contrary, it's through those things, the more physical, mundane that it is, as long as God says it's allowed, obviously, when we utilize it for the right way, we elevate it, and by doing so, we bring godliness in those things. So now we understand the significance of the Jewish body. We understand why we can't just get rid of it, that it shouldn't smell, God forbid. But therefore we have to make sure that it's buried proper. And the best place that it could be is a place that you know it's going to be for eternity. And that's why Avram didn't just want to have a little spot. He wanted to have a whole section where he knows for sure that it's not going to be touched. It's a burial site that he's going to have for him, for his family, to make sure that it's going to stay forever. And we understand why the people couldn't understand what he's talking about, because they never looked at the body of something holy. They always looked at the body. Once the soul goes out, it's a matter of time that there's nothing left, which in itself is wrong, because there's always a part of the spirit that remains within it. Question is for how long, but eventually there's always something that remains. And we also have to remember that our body is holy, and therefore we must use our body to do what God wants. We must use all our physical, materialistic things that God gave us, the talents that we had, to do what Hashem wants. All right. Any questions on the class? Yeah.
Okay, you said everything in Judaism basically is holy. So the body, mezuzah, anything is holy. Let's say, for example, the Siddur is 400 years old and it's falling apart. How do we preserve it?
So the answer is, good question. So the question is, let's say you have a Siddur, a prayer book, that's 400 years old and it's falling apart. What do you do with it? And the answer is, if there's a way to preserve it, you can preserve it in a museum. But if not, it has to get buried. It's buried, actually, most times it's buried in the Jewish cemetery. Many books, many mezuzahs, tefillin, they're not good anymore, are actually buried because there's a holiness. We mentioned in the class, actually. All right. Any other quick questions? All right. Based on this, we also understand why the Israeli army is so careful to make sure that every part of the body of a Jew, which is so holy, gets a proper Jewish burial. And that's why they go into crazy missions just to recover a body or a part of a body in order to bring it to proper Jewish burial. May God help. We shouldn't have to be talking about these things anymore. We'll finally merit the coming of Mashiach when everyone will be reunited with us. May we merit this spiel in our days. No problem. All right.